So one of the requests that we had from our alumni was to um, learn more about coaching transition. And so, a lot of our work, of course, as coaches is supporting individuals that may be changing role or experiencing other transitions in their life, different ages and stages. But of course, the constant change that we're all up against as well. Um, so in terms of the session today, we thought we'd do a slightly different format for this session, and more of a dialogue between myself and my colleagues, who you can see on the screen now. So with that in mind, I really just want to signpost, because we're working online and sometimes there may be slight delay. Sometimes we may go to speak over each other. I'm not saying we will, but that could happen. So I say just bear with us, because we're obviously flowing together but working online. So in terms of the session, I thought it'd be helpful to bring together some of our faculty for this discussion. And you can see my colleagues Claire, Sandra and Boaz on the screen. So maybe I'll just get you each to share a couple of sentences about your work as a coach, actually, just so people get a sense of you, if that's okay. So Claire, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. What would you like to say to the group about yourself?
Oh, big question for two sentences. Hello, everybody. I suppose the thing that's relevant here is I work a lot with leaders in professional services firms. So often for transitions there's particular nuances and challenges. So that potentially is something that I'll bring into the conversation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Claire. Sandra, how about you?
Yes, for me, I work with senior leaders across a range of sectors. And I think for me, gosh, would you believe it? I've just forgotten what I was about to say. But for me, no, for me, it's about working holistically and systemically. So I work with people in terms of their internal systems and the wider systemic influences that they're dealing with.
Thanks, Sandra. And how about you, Boaz?
Yeah, thanks, Damien. A bit of a theme. So likewise, working a lot in professional services, often with people who are in some kind of transition, either into an organization, transitioning role, or coming back from some kind of parental leave. I really enjoy the work with people in transitions, because often those are important points in people's lives. So an opportunity and a real privilege to join people at that time.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm sure I'm going to engage in this discussion as well. So in terms of my own coaching work, I think these are often really critical moments for people to learn about themselves as well. So I'd say, even though the conversation may be about change that they're making, often there's more sense around the identity shift that's taking place for them. So in terms of this conversation, we're going to sort of take a good 20 minutes or so today. And we're going to keep it quite open, because this is an unscripted dialogue, really, around transition. But I thought, based on the experiences we have around this sort of virtual table, I'm going to start with a question which is really, what are your key insights, reflections, learning about coaching transition? I'm going to let that question percolate for a moment, and then feel free to start the dialogue.
Well, if I start us off, for me, transition is ever present. As you say, it may be working with someone in terms of something that's tangible, a change in career or organization, or relationship. But then again, it may actually be also about confidence or their style, their approach. So it's in everything. And I'm always struck by, and I think this is about myself, working with people, helping them to reflect on themselves, their inner systems, about the flow between feeling in order to think, in order to do. And a lot of the people that I work with, or I have worked with, they've kind of cut themselves off in terms of the feelings, the emotions, that way of knowing. And it's all very cognitive. And so part of what I do is about giving them the spaciousness to actually access and lean into some of those feelings, favourable or less so, in order that that then informs their thinking.
I think I love what you say there, Sandra, and just sort of building on that, thinking of experiences, my sort of key learning, particularly when people go through very definite transitions, so often role transitions, where they're either moving into a new organisation or they're moving role within an organisation. I think what I notice is how many shoulds there are that they place upon themselves, and the pressure to perform really quickly, to present whatever they feel they ought to present, but there's a lot of demands they put on themselves, and often it's significantly more than the organisation puts on them, but it means they're quite tangled up, and it feels very pressured in the transition that they're going through. And one of the things I notice is often they get very tangled inside around how they're feeling and how they're presenting themselves and what they should and ought be doing. And it loses their capacity to notice actually what their transition has meant for others as they come into a group or a team, and how actually others might feel threatened by them. Others might feel, oh, you've come into my house and you're loading the dishwasher incorrectly. That's not what we do around here. So just noticing, they seem to forget to notice is what I feel when they're very focused on themselves. So that's probably been my biggest learning, is how to help them notice others' adjustments to them.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Sorry, Sandra, it's interesting given what Damien, you were saying at the start about an opportunity to learn about ourselves. Because actually, if we go into transition, some of our natural kind of habits emerge, and it can be quite an uncomfortable time, right? We're going through, I'm thinking of William Bridges's model, that neutral zone that can feel really uncomfortable. And so I think, Claire, to your point, if someone's come in from a role where they've really been flat out, where their diary was packed, they're landing in another organization where their diary is really quiet, that can feel really uncomfortable. And so one of the things, Sandra, to your point about what we do, is we can start to really fill that up, but fill it up maybe in a way that's less intentional, and maybe not giving us the permission to kind of lean back and just kind of notice what's going on in our organization, notice what actually the impact we want to create. So yeah, a lot of our work is about helping people give themselves those permissions.
Sandra, are you going to come in? Because I want to reflect something, but just checking.
No, you go, Damien.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, listening to you all speak, a couple of things were surfacing for me. One is, you know, Claire, what you were sharing really sparked the thought about how much of personal history comes with them and actually it's triggered. So, you know, often that the feeling that they may be experiencing, Sandra, is often a sense of something from the past as well, and experiences from the past. So actually, just the importance of having a space where they can really sort of unstick some of what may be holding them back, and how they learn about themselves. And I think the other thing is just with the coach about how they can get real clarity of expectation, whether that's you know, through a three-way process with their boss, or as you're saying, Claire, you know, really having the time to sort of learn the ground rules of the new organization, the team they're in, etc. So yeah, so I think those two elements were coming up for me: clear expectations, but also the past history that sits there as well.
And as you share that, Damien, what comes up for me, and it's touching on what you were saying, Boaz, earlier about Bridges, because as soon as anybody talks about transition, that always comes up. He comes up for me as a key reference, and just helping my client appreciate consciously that it's not necessarily the specific change that they're finding uncomfortable or they're finding challenging. It's actually the process of that shift. And in fact, as I say that now, I'm moving my own language from the noun journey to journeying. That of itself, that's the transition. And I'm thinking of your, Damien, your phrase, let go to let come.
Yeah, I'd love
And
to
I,
get
and
that, but let's say it's Otto Sharma.
is it? Oh well,
Go
sorry,
for
Otto.
it.
Sorry, Otto. I gave it to Damien, but I'm even going to flip it. And a lot of my work is, yes, there's the let go to let come, but it's actually about, and I think this is about your point, Damien, in terms of people being more alert and conscious of what they're bringing with them, is let come journeying, and in order to be able to let go. Is that, I'm hoping that makes sense. I guess I'm coming more from a psychological standpoint there.
But it's helpful, I think, to work with, to help people understand the psychological transition that they're working through, because often, even when you look at literature around, there's a lot around the first 90 days, and the book The First 90 Days is absolutely fantastic, you know, and if you get summaries of it, they're absolutely fantastic, and they're almost a playbook of how to transition if you're doing specific ones. But they don't really pay attention to the psychological transitions that people are going through. And you notice that people might have a very well set out plan, and it's brilliant, and it gives them handrails, it gives them a way of thinking. But they then start to pay less attention to, actually, but I feel really uncomfortable in the situation, or I'm trying to move quicker because I don't like not having meetings in my diary. I don't like feeling I'm not adding value from day one. And it's actually using the coaching as a space to stop and explore, not just what they're doing, but how they're being around it and what impact that's having for them. And I think that's often where the biggest gains come from the coaching is, let's just pause and look at how are you in this moment, as opposed to how many plans you put in place with your team. You know, the head can go there quite quickly, but actually, how are they? And that pause moment just enables them to connect with themselves a bit more.
Yeah, and it makes me think actually that around transition, some group coaching can be quite useful, because of course what it does is helps bring in that normalization element of actually hearing that other people are going through similar challenges, and there's something quite powerful in that.
Definitely.
Yeah, Sandra, I've just seen a question around, can you elaborate a bit more on the let go and let come principle? I don't know what else you'd want to say about that. There is something I want to add, but would you mind just reflecting on that piece first?
Yes, of course. So reattributing it to Otto Sharma, Damien, but focusing on the fact that if you like, I flip it, and I think it builds on what you were saying, Claire, about the, you know, letting, for example, how someone is feeling, or you know, engaging with some of what might be perceived as entanglements, letting those come into the conversation, and giving people, my client, the spaciousness to reflect and consider that in an almost as best as one can, a non-judgmental way, with compassion. And by non-judgmental, I mean in the client being non-judgmental, because obviously they want to rush forward, in order that those new insights, or fresh insights, acceptance, if you like, can come into the frame for them. So I hope that clarifies what I was meaning. And Damien, you were going to add.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to add something there first. I think, you know, the work we do as coaches, which, you know, if we're getting into the unconscious around, as Claire was talking about earlier, you know, beliefs or values, what's really informing their leadership style or their approach. I think, you know, just that sense of helping them really acknowledge all of that and what's serving them, but also some of that might be outdated as well.
Exactly.
In terms of what they may need to let go of now to fully succeed in this new role, new responsibility, new leadership practice. So I think that's part of it as well. But where I was going, again, it was triggered by something that Claire said, and also Boaz, when you talk about sort of normalizing with the group experience as well. I think the other thing we often do as coaches is, you know, we are a critical friend sometimes, and we may be encouraging them to pay attention to things that they're not seeing. For example, self-care. You know, so I think a big part of the work we do with leaders when we're coaching them is to start conversations around things that they may not be paying attention to, because obviously in that moment, you know, feeling like they establish themselves can feel more important than necessarily thinking about how they're looking after themselves during this high pressure situation. So that was the other thing emerging for me.
Yeah, and I think actually that's sparked some thoughts around, you know, what I've noticed in my work with leaders, how much we often don't give acknowledgement to actually the ending piece, you know, and if we're transitioning into a new organization, of course, you know, that might be our choosing and it might be for a promotion and there's a lot of great stuff there. But we're also leaving something behind, maybe something we've created, the familiarity of a system and being able to pick up the phone to people and knowing just how things work. And of course, you know, going into a new organization brings about some new stuff that will take, you know, will take time and effort to get used to. So there's often a piece around ending and letting go.
And as you say that, Damien, it reminds me, I was coaching someone not earlier this week, because that would be bizarre. Last week I was coaching them because I wasn't doing it over the weekend. And it was really interesting. They had moved up in their organization and they were relatively young themselves and they were moving up through the organization, and they were very aware of what needed to be different in their relationships with people. And it was really simple things that they let go of. Not that they define themselves as somebody that engaged in gossip, but we all engage in social gossip in a workplace. That's kind of part of the lifeblood of it. But actually, there's certain things they couldn't engage in as a leader. There's certain conversations that just wouldn't be appropriate for them to have an opinion on somebody in, as a peer or as a fellow gossipee, for example. And it was just a really tiny example of actually there had to be a slight distance in some way while still being a warm, authentic, friendly human being. And they were really noticing that named what they were noticing was happening anyway. So I think it can be really helpful to notice, well, what doesn't come with you as you move into a different role.
Yeah, and I you know, I often work systemically with people when they're in transition, and you know, a big part of the work is working experientially often with ways of anchoring the transition in the room. And I remember a lot of the times, there's a couple of things really about the ending, so I'll sort of carry on this bit, is, you know, really spending time helping them really acknowledge everything that's coming with them, everything that they are leaving behind and what they've achieved in the previous role. Especially sometimes because it may not be that clear cut, is it? Sometimes they're still having to take some responsibility for the old role. And then that movement towards the new, I often find, sorry to go, it's about self-care again, but I often find that with leaders, they have resources around them and they think they're resourcing themselves, but they're not really accessing those resources, you know. And I think, again, a coach can be a very useful mirror to really sort of challenge them around those pieces, actually, whether that's acknowledging their legacy and what they've achieved, or, well, as you're saying, Claire, actually what's required of them in the new role and what they need to let go of.
The word that's coming up for me as I listen to all of this is that, yes, there's the journey or the journeying, and the outcome actually is about helping our clients identify and experience a state of congruence, whether that be internally, let's say their values through to behaviors, or within, as you were pointing out, Claire, in terms of some of those shifts, small ones though they might be, in terms of where they are within the wider system and what some of those, let's say, behaviors need to be, new behaviors, old behaviors. And that brings me to you know, our adapted model of the McNish change curve, you know, the Infinity 8, and therefore the letting go and going through that process of perhaps confusion or discomfort or emotionally feeling discombobulated, perhaps, through to something that's for them a re-emerging order, and then a new reality, which is what you were talking about, Damien, with themselves, with others, with the tangible topic they've brought, change in role, change in organisation. and that this just all overlays, you know, transition is ever present.
Mm.
And I can see there a note from Patricia about helping people prepare for retirement or the kind of next chapter in their lives. And I've done some work, and I often really enjoy this element of work because you can really kind of explore with people what they're hoping for and what some of the concerns might be, what they want to create, what they want to take with them, areas of their lives that they want to kind of lean into a bit more. It can be really interesting work to do with people.
Yeah, and I mean, I know the coaches probably listening in will be familiar with the exercise, but you know, like a career lifeline process. Whereas I'm just thinking about, especially if someone's moving into a different stage with perhaps an ending around this main part of their career and then moving into something else. But I find that method or that way of inviting the coachee to, I always say, step back on the balcony and really take more of a broader view around their life. There's so much learning that they can take from their previous experiences of transition and what's most important to them in terms of, well, I mean, I'm talking about retirement here, the next phase, or maybe it's a new role. But I find that exercise can be very powerful to use with leaders.
I think maybe transitions for me, and again, they come up in all different guises, as Sandra mentioned. It can be an area where, as a coach, some of our tools and techniques are quite helpful because they provide, particularly if someone's feeling discombobulated, there's a holding space and there's a solidity around, actually, this might be a way you could think about it, and you can offer the tools at that point. And I think I've noticed, particularly in my practices, I feel that actually sometimes it's the coach's role to point out some of the blind areas that people might not be paying attention to. Not to say you have to pay attention to this, but just an invitation if they're very looking insular. Actually, I'm curious. I wonder what impact you're having on others in the organisation. I wonder how an exercise I quite often do in a very fun way. So if that new team's a family and you're joining it, who are in the different roles and who are you to them? And someone recently was super nanny, which was quite fascinating in itself, but starting to unpick the dynamics of how you are to others. If someone's gone very insular, I think we might introduce that notion in, because actually they're not in a space, they're thinking about themselves at that moment. So it feels somewhere we can introduce things and offer them where they often find they hold people better.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to jump in because I also know we all do this, but you know, when we're supporting a leader through transition, just the opportunity to be that independent person that can go and get some useful feedback for them once they've been in the role a number of months. You know, if we do a feedback exercise or we go out and interview some of their key stakeholders with questions they would like to answer, usually we can have a very meaningful input in terms of external perception of them, how they're being experienced in the organization as well, which would be so useful, as you're saying, Chloe, you know, the mirror.
Interesting spot, Damien, because I was literally having that conversation with someone this morning. Yeah, and their openness to it, in, you know, having that broader perspective in order to aid their own awareness, acknowledgement, and therefore action.
And I wanted just to come back, Claire, you were talking about the helpfulness of models around kind of this, around transitions more generally. There's a question around helping people manage anger or resentment that might come as a result of role being made redundant in an organization. And of course, sharing models like the Kubler-Ross and saying, you know, kind of anger actually is part of that process, and helping people kind of acknowledge that, maybe sometimes sit with that. Because actually with us, they can name that frustration, name that anger, be okay with it. And hopefully that can be kind of a way of then managing that to be able to move past it.
Yeah, because I mean, if that anger doesn't get expressed, it will become frustration, won't it? Like a secondary emotion.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, yeah, inviting them to be in the present moment with it, and to experience it. It's energy, isn't it?
There was one reflection I was having this morning, actually, before I logged in to the webinar today, of how little detail we often need as coaches. And transitions is a key example. You know, we can do a lot of work without really getting caught up in what the role is or what the transition is. And sometimes our coachees really want to give us a lot of detail because they think that's what we need. But I was reflecting actually on how little we need to work with people well around the transition. And also the risk of bringing assumptions. You know, we might think that the transition is, I was working with someone recently and she got promoted, and of course there were good elements of that. But if she could have had that a year later, that would have been preferable for her just because of other things going on in her life. So yeah, again, kind of watching our assumptions.
So I'm just going to pounce because I'm conscious of time sort of coming to an end, but maybe picking up on your reflection there, Boaz, you know, maybe if there was one piece of advice we would give a coach working in transition, just as a way of closing this dialogue down, what advice would you give them?
I think one thing I would say is invite them to share when they've what they've experienced through previous transitions, to see what learning comes from how they've done it before.
Oh, I'll pick up on that, pay you later, Claire, because what was coming through for me was, you know, as we go through transitions, we take something from that experience that adds to the next transition. As I say, it's always ongoing. So triple loop learning. Also, what's coming through for me is our presence and really being attuned to the person that we're with in the moment and modeling that for them so that they can similarly be, as Hazel had put, becoming in the moment.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah.
How about you?
For me, it's presence again. So really listening to not only what they're saying, but what their body language is telling you about how they're maybe experiencing that transition and therefore what they might need.
I think for me it'd be more of a transpersonal lens, and in terms of every obstacle is an opportunity for the coachee to grow and learn. So really holding that mindset as a coach, what's here for the coachee, what's important for them. Yeah, an opportunity to learn.